Welcome to the Sports Marketing Huddle. I'm your host, Rob Cressy, founder of Bacon Sports. And joining me today is the multiple-time guest on the show, Dave Wakeman, founder of Wakeman Consulting Group. Dave, super excited to have you back on.
Rob, man, it's so good to be here. I'm trying to work my way up so that I am the number one guest on your podcast and video stream and all the forms. So I'm working. I'm continuing to add value.
It's a good thing because you do add a ton of value and because we're very like-minded. And I'll give some insight into how you even got on this show today. Last week, you sent me an email, just a friendly one. Hey, Rob, just checking in, see how things are going in your world. And that is something that you proactively did, but it's also very representative of our relationship in the way that you and I think about things, because we randomly just ping each other, seeing how things are going. Hey, I'm working on this project, or what's going on in your world right there. And ironically enough, the day before, I was thinking about hitting you up, and boom, the synchronicity of life. Boom, Dave ends up in my inbox, and I'm like, hey, let's jump on a call like we do. And inevitably, what ends up happening is our calls should have just been podcasts because we have no agenda whatsoever, but it starts with, what are you working on, and or anything I can help you with. And then from there, it just spider webs to a variety of things. And I was like, well, you know what? I got to get you on a podcast because I know how much I get from the calls. I know you get stuff from the calls. But I think more importantly, by us sharing this with others, that there really is a good opportunity for us to deliver value for other people, because a lot of other people are probably going through similar things to what we are, or there is value in knowing our success mindset and how we're thinking about marketing and content.
Oh, absolutely. Just to give people one idea, because I think I told it to you right in the moment, but the way you described content creation from the big picture down to the small picture idea was super, super helpful to me almost immediately. And it was something that I had been stumbling upon and struggling with. But for you, it just came like right off the top of your head. And it was like really, really a valuable thing for me to learn. These things tend to happen a lot. That's why these conversations, not just me and you, but like just in general, are really, really valuable, because you don't know what people are thinking about or working on or what they've learned since the last time you talked to them.
100%. And actually, let's share a little bit about this, because I think it will help other people, because it's very much something that I'm living on a daily basis for my content creation mindset. So essentially, the way that I think about content in current day is, can we create one piece of pillar or foundational content and allow it to create multiple pieces for us? But let's think larger than we are right now, because we want to help a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So we would say, all right, Rob and Dave, we both have enough knowledge that we can both create courses, correct? Well, what if I've never created a course? How in the world do you do this? Well, let's start at the very top, creating a webinar. So maybe you create 4 one-hour webinars. And with those 4 one-hour webinars, because we can all do a 1 hour webinar, boom, do that 4 times. Well, structured in a way that may have 2 30-minute segments in each of those 1 hour webinars. So now all of a sudden we have 8 30-minute segments. And I'm like, wow, Dave, to me, that sounds like a course. So all of a sudden, now you've turned 4 webinars into a course that has 8 segments. And then I'm like, well, within each of those 8 segments, I'm sure there's an opportunity for you to drill down even larger into some of those things to refine it even more. So boom, we can create podcasts, we can create videos, we can create blog posts. And oh, by the way, let's now break those down into social media, where we can create 30-second to 1-minute little video snippets, to where all of a sudden we can make this more digestible. And then from those 30-second to 1-minute video snippets, how about we go and create 5 to 10 pull quotes from this? And all of a sudden, you look, and what seems as a daunting, how in the world do you create 100 pieces of content, a course, 4 webinars, podcast videos, and all of these things all just happened by thinking larger in terms of, what can I do with a pillar piece of content that strategically you make it value driven, saying, all right, we're going to execute on these 8 things. Boom, these 8 things is something that someone wants to learn, and then you build it all from there. Did I describe that correctly enough for you, Dave?
I believe you did a very good job. Yeah, and it's just that big idea, I think, because, and I don't know if this resonates with everybody else, but a lot of times you start with the little piece of content that you think you're going to create that's going to build up, like you're stacking blocks, which works great for a house, except for you already know what the house is going to look like. And so I think you have to design what you want the success to look like. And so you don't start building a house by putting the first block down. You start by having an architect draw up a plan. And that plan is the ultimate goal of what you want this content tree, or I forget how you described it. The term you used was very good though. And it all flows out from there. And each of those little blocks come up, they bubble up.
I think of it as a spider web.
That's it.
Where you have the pillar on the top, and then it slowly grows out to where all of a sudden it would almost look like an organizational structure for a company, where they've got a CEO and then the executives below them, and then the manager or the directors below them, and the managers below them, and the salespeople below them. I think content can be the exact same way. And I think it's an important thing that you said there about small versus large in terms of how we're thinking about this. Because when you start small, it can become daunting, because it's like, wow, I got 100 things to do. And we fall in love with one idea, right? So often it's like, oh, I got to create 100 ideas, or where am I going to create more ideas? But really, when we reverse engineer it the other way, we're just starting with one big idea. So you and I are both starting with one idea, but my one idea turns into 100 ideas, but the starting at the bottom is 100 separate ideas instead of one connected idea.
Yeah. And I think that the last way, where I started with that one piece of content, that was what was getting me jammed up. Because if I have a big idea, like for me, a lot of times it's strategy or it's revenue, it becomes very easy if I say, hey, look, I want to help, let's say, business to business consultants, right? So people like me maximize their revenue, or open new markets, or do something, anything, right? It becomes easy. So if I say, okay, I'm going to try to help you as a B2B consultant to create maximize your revenue or create a new market, where do I start? I start at the very, very tippy top with that big idea. So how do I support it, right? Well, you got to focus on your brand. You got to focus on your strategy. You got to focus on your marketing and your sales and what your value proposition is. Those are 5 key pieces. And then from each one of those, you can probably explain value 50 different ways, and you can explain marketing. Lord knows we can't probably never going to come to the end of that, but you start with the basics, and there's tons and tons of basics that you need to develop over and over again. The sales, the thing goes on, and it becomes so easy to create ideas to share value with people, because you can ask yourself the question, what's going to move people forward? What are people going to find value? What do people get jammed up on? What are the questions that, like, somebody asks me or you regularly, and you can create content around those things.
And I think that's the important thing when I think about creating courses or delivering value for people. I actually default to simple and easy. So often, like you mentioned with marketing, we're never going to be able to get to everything that we could potentially talk about with marketing. But can I just have one little shift for you, where in one of the 8 pieces of micro content, I'm like, hey, Dave, think about this. Just write a good caption. And you're like, what? I'm like, yeah, man, when you're writing your caption, just like be intentional just about that one thing right there. And you're like, well, I never really thought about that, because I'm worried about, is the lighting right in my picture? And what filter am I using? Am I using the right hashtags? And the blah, 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 blah. And sometimes I really find that defaulting to the micro, can you just teach someone one thing? Because maybe the way that we're going to structure it, and it's actually the way that I structure my courses, is today all I'm going to teach you is how to write a caption. Boom, that's it. We're not moving on to anything else today. Tomorrow we can go to filters or something else like that. And by doing it, it allows you to make it easy, because I think one of the biggest challenges in learning anything or the transfer of something is overwhelm. Similar to what you experienced with the starting small on the content and moving up as opposed to the other way down. You feel overwhelmed. You're like, how in the world am I going to do all of these things? And because of that, I'm always times the the guinea pig. How am I going to learn? How am I going to do this? So I'm not just creating theories and teaching things that I just read somewhere. It's like I'm actually living these things. So how did I learn, and how can I make it easier for you to learn by making it as simple as possible, which is the opposite of what most people think.
Right. No, this is the idea that you talk about being your own guinea pig. It's absolutely the truth, right? Because I do a Sunday newsletter called The Business of Value, and you can get it at thebusinessofvalue.substack.com. And a friend of mine, Bruce, sent me an email yesterday. He goes, I love the way that you are so pragmatic about the things you talk about. And I wrote back, I said, Bruce, the big thing about being pragmatic is because I'm a practitioner. I'm not theoretical. All of these things I'm telling you not to do is because I've made those mistakes. Don't do what I did. Do what I learned not to do, right? And it's simple, right? It's like you get overwhelmed. I tell people all the time, hey, look, don't tell everybody what you need, everything you know, because that'll overwhelm them. Tell them what they need to know to move forward a step, because they can always come back to you and learn more. So that these concepts that you're talking about, they are so meaningful, and I think it's maybe a product of the time and the way the internet's set, and the way like you can do a Google search and do a deep dive on Google, and you can go 57 pages into the Google search and be overwhelmed by everything, that we feel like we need more and more information. But no, we just need enough to take action, because the thing is like there's a lot of theory, and you learn so much more by taking action, right? So focus on the captions, like you said, or like when I started focusing on the subject lines in my newsletters, the open rate became much, much greater. And it's just one little small thing, and then you can fix the next thing, and you move on and on and on. You're making progress, which excites you and inspires you and makes you continue to go forward.
And I want to give a shout out to my man, Gregory, who is watching this on LinkedIn Live, who chimed in, simple is greater than complex. And then he also said, the best teachers make the complex simple. And I completely agree. And thank you very much, Gregory, for chiming in here. And I think this is actually a great transition to one of the things that you and I talked about, Dave, was in talking about what is going to be coming out of the current time that we are living in right now. And you said there will be a renewed need for processes. And this resonated 1,000,000% with me, because it is the exact thing that I have been focusing on with my business, that a lot of people, uncertainty leads to inaction. You don't know what to do. You don't know what the times are going to be. So for me, I'm like, all right, well, if others are doing inaction, for me, I want to build a more solid foundation. What is a more solid foundation for my business? It is systems and processes. Why? Systems and processes are repeatable. It is something that allows you to foundationally build upon. Systems and processes, they are not sexy at all. Systems and processes, they can seem complex. But guess what? At the end of the day, they are simple if you can just break them down. And for me, I'm actually becoming more excited about processes, because it's the exact thing that I teach my clients and students when it comes to a large majority of things, whether it's mindset or how do you launch a podcast. Because how do you get to 600 podcast episodes? Well, you do the same process one time and multiply it 600 different times. So I teach the perfect podcast process so that you can execute this thing over and over again. So I want to see if you could expand on that, because I believe it is such an important point, the importance and renewed need for processes.
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring this question to me right now, because what I have been thinking about, I've been thinking about processes, but I also been thinking about frameworks and sort of best practices. And so I want to separate these things, because I think a process is very important, because it gives you a framework for knowing what you need to do to achieve the goal you set. So like the example you use with the podcast, and having a formula for that is very great, because it gives you the freedom to be creative, which is super, super important. I think sometimes when people think about processes, they think about frameworks or guidelines or best practices. Those things will drive you to be the lowest common denominator. So like when you're looking at best practices or you're looking at these frameworks, I don't like those, because they do tend to take away your creativity. A process or a framework that allows you to say, hey, look, these are kind of the questions I want to talk about. Like I make an outline for each of the podcasts I do, right? And I know that what I played with the titles on the podcast episodes to see which ones get better impact, right? All these things, those are a process, right? So, I've got to make sure the bumper music on both sides. I got to outline my introduction. I got to outline the questions that I want to have on the meat of the content, in the interview session. And then what do I want to say at the very end, right? All these things are a part of the process. In that process, though, I have a lot of creativity because just last week I did an episode with a guy from the Australian Football League called Ollie Scheuer, right? And the only thing that I put in there was I wanted to have a conversation around the sales funnel, right? But I knew that I needed to do all these other things around it, but I had tremendous creativity within the podcast. So to sum up what you're asking about the processes, you want to have just enough there so that you make sure you don't miss a step, but not enough process and rigid format that it takes away your creativity. So, most of the time a process could be 4 or 5 steps, but it just helps you know that you're hitting the marks that you need to hit, not that you're doing things the exact same way everybody else is doing so that you seem just like one of many. You need that freedom to be creative so you're the unique individual or unique project or unique thing that you are.
I love the way that you framed it. It made complete sense to me because you and I both very avid readers, and we'll get to our book recommendations at the end.
I'm virtue signaling.
One of the big game-changing books for me was Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. And the thing that he says and preaches all the time, discipline equals freedom. And it's exactly what you're talking about right here. And when I teach creating podcast scripts or being a host, I've written, like you said, a script for every single show I've ever done. And the reason for that is it allows you to get from A to B, knowing that from A to B is going to be a circuitous route. It's not going to be very linear, and success and business and life is not linear. But if you can put in these guardrails for yourself that says, listen, you do these things, you are going to get an end result. It doesn't matter how you get to the end result, but when you follow these things I've said the same intro every single time. I've said the same outro every single time. Why? I don't have to think about it. You can just execute, because sometimes in business or in podcasting, there's things you just need to execute and there's things to be creative. So think about it as art versus science. Hey, you need to introduce your guest. That's not something we really want to get creative with. You can, but it may be better used your time on let's get creative how Dave and I are going to be jamming about things.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And, with my podcast, I've sort of taken the opposite thing where I give a unique introduction every time, but I know that I'm going to do that. And I make sure that I create an outline for it. Whatever process works for you, right? Because you don't want everything to be overwhelming, I think is the key. Because if you make it so that every piece of the project is overwhelming, you won't do any of them. You've done over 600 podcasts, and with your encouragement, I'm now on like 125, right? And so those don't happen by accident, right? The average podcast maybe makes it 6 episodes. And I think it's for the exact reason that people don't create a process for themselves, right? Even if it's a loose thing like mine or more rigid like yours, it makes every piece of content become just this overwhelming obstacle where I have to become creative about the whole thing. I have to sit here and create a brainstorming session. I have to, it becomes tedious, right? It's the same thing. People are, how do you write so much? Well, I keep a notebook with ideas, right? I observe things all day long. I make little notes about them. So then when I sit down to write, I have 100 ideas in my notebook. I just check one off, right? Or if something really sparks inspiration, I'll make a note of it. I'll start writing the thing out in my notebook right away, because it is not hard. That's why I'm able to do it, right? I can write very quick. I can type very quickly now. But the creativity comes throughout the day, and it's making notes and paying attention and make, so I don't have to recreate everything every single time.
I love it. And that's one of the reasons why you and I get along, because I use Evernote to track all of my notes, and I am always writing down notes. And I even go as far as to say, I want to write down at least one idea a day. and this is something I'm not sure if this was from Steve Martin or who it was, Seth Godin, somewhere along the line. I learned somewhere. Oh no, it was James Altucher. That's who it was, who, by the way, has good books. And he's like, hey, if you can just get into a habit, I think for him, it's 10 ideas a day.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Imagine at the end of the year when you have 3,600 ideas. And guess what? One thing I learned in comedy writing at Second City when I was doing a writing for the Onion course is the success rate of ideas. For every 100 ideas, you're going to be lucky to get 10 of them that are actionable. So really the process of idea creation is a filtration of junk to try and unearth the gold for you. So let this be a little nugget. So often I say, sometimes in life, you have to hear something a million times before you take action. So if Dave writes down ideas and I write down ideas on a daily basis, and if you're listening or watching this right now, and you're not writing down ideas, doesn't mean you have to, but sometimes just follow success. They leave little breadcrumbs along the way, and you say, wait a second, do these people know what they're talking about? Maybe I should consider this. And Dave, what I love about our conversation is you led me to our next segue about something that you helped me with in terms of a breakthrough in our conversation. And here's what you said to me. I was talking about the content creation process for social media. And so often people run into the challenge of consistency or a lack thereof. And you said it's difficult to manually produce all the actions necessary to do the things I need to do to get maximum impact. And this is relating to your content. So for example, we can look at our own brands, a brand of Rob and Dave, and you can say, all right, well, we create content on LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and you've got a newsletter, and you've got a blog, and you've got a video, and you've got a podcast, and you've got a webinar, and all of a sudden you're like, that's like 9 different touch points here. How in the world do I make sure that I'm on top of the ball on all of the different things? Because it's a lot to do on a manual process to stay on top of all of those different things. And you said, Rob, it's hard to do. And it's one of the things that as a creative, I think everyone's going to have a never-ending journey with. You can always want to be on top of it, but there's always we can always do more, which actually goes back to the process side of things. Can you expand a little bit more upon that? Because it was a big eye-opener for me, the way that you framed it about to get maximum impact, which us as marketers, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. So like a lot of people, I would say that the new shiny thing is always attractive to me, right? And so what I understood was that, and this is the lesson I try to impart to everybody, is that you don't need to be everywhere. You need to be where your people are. And, so I think it goes back to strategy, right? Which is, if you're getting really, really simple with strategy, it comes down to 3 questions. It's what's the value I'm trying to create for the market? Who's the customer I'm trying to reach? And how do I reach them? So to manually produce all of this content is really, really difficult, right? And so and especially if you don't go through a process like Rob and I were talking about before, where everything is a struggle to figure out exactly what you want to teach, what you want to share, what you want to offer. You have to end up going back and forth over and over and over again and going, every time I'm going on Twitter, I need to think of something witty and valuable to offer. If I go on LinkedIn, I got to come up with something that's like professional sounding and great to offer people. If I write a blog, what's the blog going to be about and how's it going to be valuable to people? So to make it simple for yourself, you do have to go through this process of thinking about who you are, what's the value you want to create, and have things flow through that value, right? It's funny that Rob was able to explain the content creation part of it, from a expanding your ability to, offer value to people in that way. And then I brought the idea back about how it's very difficult to do it, and you need to be more focused on the big picture thing and offering it up, because we got to the same idea 2 different ways, and we didn't see that we were really telling each other the same piece of advice. I don't know if I really answered the question though, Rob.
No, you did. And we actually just had another comment from someone on LinkedIn who said, really nice conversation. How do you improve the copywriting from ideas? So I think this is actually a great
Ooh.
question that speaks to the creative side of things. And I'll be
I made
candid
notes
on this
morning about
I'll be candid on
copywriting.
this for my answer is I am unemotional and remove expectations for the ideas that I write down. So for me, I am meticulous about writing ideas down because I know any one idea could be the idea, the thing that I've been missing or overlooking. So I want to write all of those down. At the same time, I need to improve my process of going back to my ideas to go through to take them out. Thankfully for me, the idea generation process of what do you talk about comes very natural to me, where my ideas are less on what's going to be on my podcast. And these are more life, business, creative, project-based ideas where when something comes in, maybe it's a fleeting moment or something for me where I write it down. And I would think to go full circle, when I optimize this, and this is perfect. I actually have a calendar reminder that was set 5 years ago, once a month, to go back into my Evernote files and review my ideas. And I don't currently do it. 5 years ago, I set that. But guess what? I never deleted that. So it's a constant reminder in there for me. So the simplest thing that I would do is you would go back and just see what resonates for you, because I think that's what it is does a piece of gold come out? And then if you find that little piece of gold, take it from the unedited, we'll call our idea sheet unedited, and then move it over to a new bucket of your mind or a new folder or a new notebook that said, you know what, these are ideas with legs. Now let me take this and put this into my creation process that says, ooh, here's the idea. Now here's the process to execute upon it. But Dave, I'm curious to hear from your side of things. How do you improve the copywriting from an idea?
Okay, so I think I want to add a little bit to what you were talking about, going back to the Evernote before I answer this question, which is think about this too. Like, the idea doesn't need to be perfect. I was actually there's a wonderful person that I'm going to have a podcast episode going live in the next couple of days with, called Zoe Skaman, and she's from the UK. She started a company called Bodacious. She has a great Twitter account that she runs under her name. But we were talking about this and the fact that you need to have a lot of bad ideas to have a good idea. And I was thinking about that this morning, and it really, it stuck with me. And so when you take those ideas, right, you can make them spiderweb, like Rob said earlier, down into different pieces of content, because it could be like a completely incomplete idea that you have written down in your Evernote, or like I use these notebooks, right? Like, so I write on paper. And you could take that and go, well, how's a bunch of different ways that I can create some value around this idea that's not fully formed, that'll help me maybe create a useful idea that can add value to people. Now, does that make sense to you, Rob?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. You're my audience here. I've never done a video like this before, so now I'm performing to the audience.
It makes complete sense. Keep going.
Okay, so then copywriting, right? I try to write like I talk to people. And so that has made it so that when people meet me, or people call me up, or they want to do something with me, and they go, man, you sound just like I imagined you would. And I go, I'm either frightened of that or I've done a good job. And so the thing is like, you want to write to the reader, not at the reader. So like, you want to talk like you're talking, like I'm talking to Rob right now. So I try to reflect that in my writing. I try to, talk about value and put it in a context that people are going to see the impact of anything I'm talking about, right? So they can put themselves in my shoes and see things from like the point of view I am, and vice versa. I try to make things when I write. I don't necessarily always focus on grammar as much as I could, right? I studied a ton of English, but sometimes making it more impactful means not necessarily being wed to the rules, having poetic license with the way I write. I don't try to persuade people, right? I more like try to lead them on a path, like Hansel and Gretel. I try to show them the road that they need to get to. I try to have a voice that's uniquely my own, right? And I try to be empathetic for people, right? And this is something that has been very valuable over the last couple of years. Is I think I would get frustrated because at the end of any economic cycle, there's a lot of irrationality, and it was tough for me to empathize with that. And I've really trained myself to be empathetic for people. So when I write, I don't expect that people are in some way or form damaged or ignoring the reality or any of these things. I just go like, well, if I were that person, what would I think? And I try to write in a way that conveys my understanding of the situation that they are in. And those are some of the things that really guide me to improve my writing and my copywriting.
And
I think the big thing is be human. I think that would be like the whole sum is write like a person.
Well, welcome to Rob's Marketing 101. I don't want you just to write like a human. I want your brand to be a human. It's why I am such an advocate for podcast, video, and live stream, because so much has become a commodity. You can buy anything from anywhere at any time. And because of it, what's really going to give me a reason to want to look forward to hearing back from your brand, knowing that I can just go buy something off Amazon or Instagram just like this? It is going to be the human touch. All right, how do we add human touch to our marketing? Well, most brands, it just says, buy what I'm selling, buy what I'm selling. Well, that's not very human touch. Instead, imagine what it sounds like when you can actually hear a voice where you can transfer this emotion for them. That's why I believe more brands need to be doing these things to allow their heartbeat to shine, to build those connections. But to sort of and some of the stuff that you were talking about from a writing standpoint, I'm completely on board with the liberties of not being perfect from a grammar standpoint. And quite frankly, I prefer imperfect content, because one of the things that trips up a lot of people is they think things have to be perfect from their content creation. And I think about my maturation from episode 1 of creating content to episode 600 plus. I no longer care about almost anything. Like, I preach and teach consistency. And it's almost like if you're going to teach someone how to ride the bike, you're not going to be showing them like how you can just like chill on the back like you do when you're like 10 years into it. Now I'm to the point where I don't need to prove to myself that I'm going to continue to do the podcast, which is probably one of the bigger challenges for people early on. How can I keep doing this when I don't think I have enough time? Whereas now I'm like, I can go 4 days without doing one. I can do 5 in a row. Like, that doesn't matter to me. I also, from the writing and brand voice side of things, I like how you said you're not trying to persuade people. I like to share what I did or am doing or going through. Once again, back to the eating our own dog food. The best way for me to share a lesson or to give some perspective on mindset and the way that I'm living, I'm not telling you that you need to wake up early and meditate and do gratitude and journaling and write down ideas. I'm just saying I do those things, and here's the benefits that I see from them and why it's important for me to do this for my own self. And it just so happens, if you like Rob's World, I can give you a new or unique perspective that, if nothing else, I'm going to give you an opportunity or a potential challenging thought to say, hey, here is a different way. And I think that's important because I like being different. One thing that I write down every single day, which I learned from Jesse Itzler, be a different brownie. I want to be different. And I want to give different perspectives to others, because we live in a world of sameness and everything's so homogenous. So by offering perspectives, instead of saying you need to do this, I'm going to say this is what I do. And in doing so, you're going to sound a lot more authentic and have a more real brand voice, because you're just chopping it up like you would chop it up with Rob and Dave.
Yeah, I think that's you bring up the thing where everything's homogenized. And I know that I don't remember where I read it now. Maybe it was I'd have to go back to figure out where I've read it. But it talked about the algorithms that drive so much of the things that we do, like so Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, and my hand is, I can see it in one screen, I can't see it in the other. But the thing about it is having a point of view is more important than ever. And being willing to take a stand or say something that you truly believe in, even if it goes counter to what other people might think they believe, is very, very important. Not because you're trying to be contrary, it's because you're trying to be yourself. And you can't necessarily stand out in the world and in the market today, because, I mean, eventually we all have to go back to work, and we all are trying to, create careers for ourselves, you have to be willing to stand up for your ideas. And you don't do that by being number 100, telling the Gary V crush it story again. You don't do that. You have to have your own unique voice. You have to have your own point of view. And you do that by collecting ideas, by sharing ideas, right? By being wrong an absolute unbelievable amount of time. You have to do that. You have to really, really be comfortable with that, because it's not easy. It's not always fun. But the thing is like, if you want to stand out, if you want to create content, if you want to be always moving forward and growing, you have to be willing to be wrong, because nobody needs another checklist with the same 7 points on how to sell more. Nobody needs that. People need unique perspectives, unique ideas. This is how I do it and why, so that you can maybe fit yourself into that box and see how some or all or none of this is going to benefit you. But at least instead of just trying to copy me or Rob, you're going to have an understanding of why you do it. And that's going to make you better, stronger, smarter, faster, sexier, cooler, all these things. It's going to help.
Well, right. And we might as well just,
I got a lot of adjectives.
Plug the book, Start With Why by Simon Sinek, because your why and the strength of it is so important to anything that you do. And this will be the last thing I say before we transition to talking about our books, is for me, and this has probably been one of both the best thing and one of the hardest things of my journey, is very much what they call the starving artist syndrome, where you love to paint, but in order to continue to paint, you need to get paid. Someone needs to buy your painting. And I have found that creators who just love to create, irregardless of the results, that would say, Rob, if no one ever looked at a single blog post, tweet, podcast, video that you did, would you do that tomorrow? And my answer would be, of course I would do that tomorrow, because it's what I love to do. And when you create for yourself and you remove the expectation that anyone has to see it, that's where the good stuff comes from, because you're creating from the place of art, not from the I have to do it for the likes. And the more that you can work on getting to that place where you love to create for the sake of creating. And this exact podcast that you and I, Dave, right now is a perfect example of it. Because is there a KPI that you and I have at this moment that says, man, if 1,000 people don't view this thing, this is going to be a complete failure? No, I was just happy to be able to talk to you. I was excited for today. I was looking forward to this. And the more that you can do that, the more that you're going to shine. And that ends up being the better content. When you're not pressing, but you're just creating, that's the place you want to get to.
Well, let me add two things to this, right? So the first one you're talking about, the Start With Why, and we can talk about Simon Sinek another time, because I think we might disagree on this one, but that's okay. That's what makes this awesome. Don DeLillo said, and if nobody knows who Don DeLillo is, he may be the greatest American fiction writer ever. His book Underworld is my favorite book ever. It travels the ball from the shot heard around the world from that game all the way to the dawn of the internet in the 90s. It's a great book. It's about 700 pages. You got 2 weeks till Labor Day. Go get it. It's great. But he said he didn't know what he thought until he wrote. And that's the way I've always approached a lot of the content I create. I don't know exactly what I feel or how I think about a subject until I have written about it, or until I've had a podcast with somebody about it, or if you just had a jam session, right? Which the second point is, Rob and I both talked about process and like how our process for doing these things is. Neither one of us had an agenda when we started out today. We were like, oh, we're gonna do a LinkedIn streaming video. We'll put it on the podcast streams. It's going to be great. And that's how we started this. And so you're seeing, how a conversation and back and forth can go and happen, and hopefully how valuable it can be. When you get kind of free form, when you're willing to bat ideas around and jump back and forth, there's a lot of value in that. And I think you have to have room in that in your life for that, where there's kind of, was it kismet? Is that the word? So like the ideas can bounce around, they can play with each other.
And so that I am transparent, I did write a script 4-hour conversation. There are probably 8 more things that I want to get to. But here, that's the beauty of it, is I looked at our past conversation and said, what are the top 5 things we talked about that I know will deliver value for other people? And then we just start yes-anding on each of these different things. We don't end up getting to all of them, but guess what? I knew where this conversation was going to go from a value standpoint, even if I didn't know the exact conversation points that we were going to have. So Dave, let's get to the last part.
Well, let me add one more thing before we do that last part.
Yes.
The yes and thing is very important. You say it all the time. I know it's an improv thing. And I think that one of the things when you're doing content creation and you're trying to create a brand for yourself or trying to move forward in your career is not to dismiss ideas right away. And you do that. So it's like the difference between and but, right? Yes, but Rob had an outline for our conversation today, but we went off script. No, yes, and we still did what we were going to do. And it's just a huge mental shift. It's simple. I would say that until I became aware of it, I even thought it was ridiculous, but actually it's really great. It's a really great tool. And there's like a lot of little things like that seem innocuous or even irrelevant, that if you can train yourself to just think differently for just a second, it gives you an opportunity to create something really, that you didn't think you could do before.
Well, yeah, it's a complete game changer when you're a builder, not someone who tears things down, because all of a sudden more good things come when you build opposed to tearing things down. So now let's get to our quick book recommendations.
Sure.
And for me, all I'm going to do is look at the past 3 books that I read, because I read 30 or 25 to 30 minutes every single day for the last 7 years. So our list is constantly going. So as we speak, I'm reading a book called Just Listen, Discover the Secret to Getting Through to Absolutely Anyone by Mark Golston. I really am enjoying this book because who in the world's reading about listening? This is one of those skills that is extremely valuable for you to understand more of. Number 2, How to Fight a Hydra. Face Your Fears, Pursue Your Ambitions, and Become the Hero You're Destined to Be by Josh Kaufman. Super short book, super unique from an analogy standpoint. Highly recommend. And then the last one, The Biggest Bluff, How I Learned to Pay Attention, Master Myself, and Win by Maria Konnikova. It's a book about how someone with no poker experience whatsoever essentially won poker tournaments on the highest level with the help from a pro, but she's like a high-end psychologist or mindset person. So it weaves together success, mindset, and poker.
Yeah, I think that book is great. I read it. I might even have been who suggested that one to you, because I really
believe you did.
There you go. All right, 3 books. The Business of Expertise by David C. Baker. It is about taking what is unique about you and creating a business around your ideas. And it's going to tell you to niche down a lot. It's great. David C. Baker's great. The book is awesome. It was self-published, by the way, and it's only you can get it in hardback. It's beautiful. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, I would tell you to go back to some of the classics by Peter Drucker. Right, the one I've been reading through lately is Management. It's the revised edition. It's about 800 pages. It is the textbook that he used for all of his classes when he was teaching at Claremont University in California when they started the MBA program. Peter Drucker, a big influence on me. And then the final one is right over my shoulder here. It's called Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. Rory is a friend of several friends of mine in London. He is an advertising guy. This is like all about what we talked about viewing the world differently, about kind of challenging your ideas, challenging the ideas that you have taken as, proven or common knowledge, and, and looking at things differently. And it's a great, great book. So The Business of Expertise, Management, and Alchemy would be 3 I would point you to. And Underworld, if you're going to read fiction, The Sheltering Sky by Paul Bowles is another favorite book. And then The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, because everybody probably needs a little break, so read some fiction.
Love it. Dave, I always have
poetry too? I'm joking.
I always had such a good time jamming with you. Where can everybody connect with you?
I would tell people to get one of my newsletters. If you're in sports business, which Rob has a lot of people, get talkingtickets.substack.com. If you're in just business in general, I put a Sunday newsletter out that is The Business of Value. It's businessofvalue.substack.com. Follow me on the Twitter. I'm at David Wakeman there. go to my website. It's davewakeman.com. That's where my blog is. Listen to my podcast, The Business of Fun, if you're so inclined. Connect with me on all these things. Let me know what you liked about our conversation today. If it was something about Rob that was not good, let me know. I won't tell Rob. It'll be awesome. If it's something bad about me, don't tell me. I don't want to hear it. Okay?
And as always, I would love to hear from you about this episode. There are so many different things that we talked about, from being your own guinea pig to small picture versus large picture, to producing content at the maximum level, to books that you're reading. You can hit me up on all social media platforms at Rob Cressy. I would really love to hear from you. And if you're on Instagram, go ahead and send me a screenshot of you listen to this. You can go to baconsports.com, see how we're getting down there. And for those who haven't listened before, recently I launched a new podcast called Leadership DNA, where we break down the various fundamentals of leadership to help you be a better leader, both for yourself and for your team. Would love for you to check it out. It's super unique, super interesting. Other than that, hope you have yourself an absolutely fantastic rest of the day.